Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Caleb. If you're not new, thanks for coming back. Always happy to have you. If you are new here, I like to do a lot of reading, writing, lifestyle, bookish content here on this channel. So if you enjoy any of that, think about sticking around and subscribing. It has been a minute since we've had a truly bookish video here on this channel, especially not a bookish sit-down video. So we are going to get it done today. I'm excited to rank my 9 reads in the year of 2026 so far. Today is June 1st, so we're just about almost 6 months through the year. So I'm a little behind on the goal, I won't lie. And you know what? I haven't read that much, but we're gonna work on it. I am currently on medical leave, so I'm pre-filming a bunch of videos and getting them posted so we can have a smooth return to YouTube. I will say I have been in the biggest reading slump of my life. It's been so hard for me to read this year. And I feel like I say this every year, I've had so much going on, but not even that. I've had more time this year than I have in probably the past 2.5 years to read, but I just cannot do it. My brain is not taking in stories the same way, and it's just not holding my attention right now. So I'm currently on a 6-week medical leave, and I'm trying to turn that around and get back to reading, solve my reading slump. So if you have any recommendations or any books that I should check out, let me know in the comments down below. 2026 kicked off and I was dealing with a back injury, and I had just finished my master's degree, which was in English literature. My last semester was a brutal amount of reading and writing, so that definitely turned my brain off of reading for a very long time. So we're trying to get it back. But that being said, in spite of all of those challenges, in spite of not really being in a reader mood, I have gotten through 9 books this year, and I want to talk about them with you. At this point in the video, make sure you leave me a comment and let me know what is your top read so far this year. Again, I need those recommendations. And what has been your least favorite or most disappointing read so far in 2026? We don't have to talk about it crazy. Grab a water, grab something to drink, and let's get into it. I will say my biggest surprise so far this year is that a lot of my reading has come from audiobooks. I am normally not an audiobook girly. They do not hold my attention. I zone out for 2 seconds and I've lost the plot. I can't do it. I so respect the people that can audiobook. I'm just not one of them. Except this year I have been. Audiobooks have been more than half of my reading this year, which is, I think, honestly the biggest shock for me. Not even the volume of reading that I have or have not done, but that audiobooks have taken the cake and have been the way that I have been getting books in so far in 2026. I think another disappointing reading update that I am sort of following right now and kind of reconciling is that reading physical books just does not do it for me right now, which is so devastating because obviously I have a ginormous library full of books that are beautiful that I want to read, but I'm reading faster and I'm more likely to finish a book if I'm on my Kindle or it's audio. I don't know what it is, but we're trying to figure it out. I'm gonna go honestly from the lowest to the highest. We're gonna end on a positive note. But I, again, like I said, have been reading on audio or on my Kindle. I don't have them with, I have 1 physical book to show you currently. Otherwise I will put the picture up on the screen. Okay, I'm pulling up my Kindle app because I actually don't literally know what this book is called. I did read it, but this is like no slander or criticism. Honestly, even putting these books in order to like say it's the second to last, it doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the book. This is, I'm embarrassed to say, I don't put this in my Goodreads because my family does not need to know the random Kindle Unlimited smut that is finding its way to my Kindle. Who puts it there? I don't know. This is Heartstrings, a single dad, small town, spicy cowboy romance by Kes Winter. This just is last because I half read this in the sense of like, I read every page, but my brain was not like absorbing things, was not engaging, could not tell you a single thing about this premise, any of the characters' names. It was purely a fluff read, and that's why it's at the bottom of the list. The next book I listened to on audio, and again, like I said, this being second to last does not mean I didn't like this book. It just wasn't as exciting, or I have more to say about the others. So for number 8, we have Alex E. Harrow's Starling House, which I listened to on audio through my library in the Libby app. This book was really great. I'm gonna be honest, listened to it a long time ago, like back in January, February. I don't remember the characters' names, but it was very much a Southern Gothic. The premise was this girl was living really down on her luck, kind of grew up in poverty without a solid family life or home life. Her mom passed away when she was young. She's now in like her mid-20s, I want to say, and is trying to create a life for her younger half-brother, but they live in this small town in Kentucky where basically like a big energy corporation is sort of taking over that town and the natural landscape of Kentucky around them, giving them really terrible air quality, water quality. And there is this like mythical legendary house nearby that's kind of like the Boo Radley house of this town, where mysterious things happen there. It has sort of a reputation about it, and like weirdos come out of the Starling house. Nobody ever goes in, or anybody that goes in doesn't come out. She starts interacting with the proprietor, the person who's living there, who is a starling, and learning the lore and the magic of this house. And she gets a cleaning job there, where she gets closer to the house, she gets closer to the proprietor, and really unearths this well of magic within this house. And it's based on a book written by the original owner of the house, in which it was a twisted spin on Alice in Wonderland, but like grotesque, fantastical creatures and things with like a little bit of a darkness, not as like whimsical magic, but it is sort of this like portal for this dark, twisted, unsettling magic to come out of into the real world. I gave this book, I want to say like 3.5 stars when I read it. I did really enjoy it. I liked the premise. Honestly, Southern Gothic and Gothic literature in general is something that I really enjoy, as well as magical realism. It reminded me of Maggie Stiefvater's The Raven Boys, and I loved that series when I was a teenager, and honestly I would reread that again. And I loved how the setting and the characters that Alex E. Harrow created, but honestly I feel like the plot kind of flopped in the last quarter. We were wrapping things up, but it just felt a little like it fell flat for how well the rest of the setup was throughout the rest of the novel. It just moved pretty quickly, and it felt like it wrapped up too neatly for all of the chaos that was happening in that book, but it was still a really good read. Book number 7 on the list of 9 is The People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. I felt a little bit like a poser being an Emily Henry fan, but having never read People We Met on Vacation. And I did fully read this because the Netflix movie came out in January. This was the first book that I read of the year, and my sister and I read this together. We did a buddy read, and I really liked it, honestly. I read it fairly quickly, probably within a week, and I loved the feeling of travel in this book, and how she timed so well but gave us really thorough vignettes of all of these different places and their journeys. I will say they talk a lot about this like big incident that happened in this friendship that destroyed their friendship, and it was like literally a little makeout. I was a little bit like, can we get it's just a makeout, guys, it's fine. So I thought that was a little like blown out of proportion, and was a little bit of a flop to be like, oh, the big thing that destroyed our friendship and made it weird was we made out once. Like, that felt really good, but again, it felt more like a fluffy, light read for me. It wasn't one that I was like, oh, I'm gonna think about this and it's gonna stay with me for a really, really long time. I liked it, I enjoyed it, but it was not by any means like a life-changing read. I will say too, we did watch the movie, and tried and true, I liked the book better than I liked the movie. Number 6, this is actually one I truly think the number placement does not reflect how I felt about the book. And that was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which I also listened to on audio. By the way, for People We Meet on Vacation, I did physically read that book, but I sold it immediately after I read it. For The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I listened to this on audio, and I actually really, really liked this book. After my master's degree, was excited to read things that would make me think, and I actually had kind of a whole series in a video I might still post or I might refilm, but I'm really trying to use books, and I've been interested in reading books that help me grapple with what's happening in our world right now, in the sense of either learning something or thinking about systems, thinking about politics, thinking about the implications of what's happening in the world around me. And so The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came up, and I thought this was a really, really great character study in thinking about how dystopian America that is the Hunger Games came to be. This is actually really interesting. In my job, I work at a university creating programs for high school students. I'm a former educator. I taught middle school and high school English. And my boss, when he first came onto the team, he asked me about what I like to read, because he likes to read a lot of nonfiction. And he's like, I've heard people that read fiction are more like people intelligent. So I'm trying to think of books I should read to better not just learn facts, but learn people and empathy. But this was the first book that I read that I was like, oh, I want to tell him to read this book, because it really helped me understand like motivations, and it kept me unpacking character. Knowing where Coriolanus Snow ends up, I went through the whole book trying to anticipate what was going to happen to make that change in his character, because it felt like seeing him grow up in Panem post-war and how that affected him. I could not put the puzzle pieces together of how he got to be pro-Hunger Games and to be the dictator that he became. And I kept thinking, like, this situation that he has been born into and he's inherited, in my head, would make him a rebel, would turn him into a rebel. But as the book goes on, you can see more and more how he becomes the person he does. And it was really, really interesting. It was a book that while I listened, it kept me thinking the entire time, which I really enjoyed. And honestly, this is gonna sound a little weird. I wish there was a little bit more of the Hunger Games element, but at the same time, the Hunger Games were not what they became at that time in the world of Panem, which I think just also speaks to Suzanne Collins' ability to create a world as dystopian and disturbing as it is. Panem of the Hunger Games and Catching Fire and Mockingjay just didn't come out of nowhere. It became that way. It grew out of an original society. It came out of our society, and I appreciate how it made me think. For someone who really hated President Snow in the original or the core trilogy, I liked this one a lot more than I thought I would. This one I think does fit for me. This is another audio. This is Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. This is some of her older fantasy fiction from before she got big, and it was actually the first T. Kingfisher novel I ever read and listened to, and I actually really liked this. This felt like, for me at a time when I was really missing like cozy fantasy in general, my fantasy hobbies, video games, D&D, reading fantasy, all of that good stuff, this audiobook was a really, really good bit of that, exploring a new world in society. I also just thought it was such an interesting premise for both of our main characters. Their origin stories I thought were very interesting, but basically this follows a paladin whose god that they are sworn an oath to has died, and I'm like, that's such an interesting question to explore, like what is left behind when a paladin's god dies? Can a god die? Like, what happens then? Who is working as kind of like a hired sword guard in this city, and interacts with a perfumist who is being charged with murder. And it is just such a like medium stakes higher fantasy. It's not like a Mistborn or a Game of Thrones or anything like that, but it is just a like middle of the road. If you want something that's got some grit to it that you can sink your teeth into, that's not way over your head and is not a cozy fantasy, I think Paladin's Grace is a great read. It is a series. I want to say there are at least 3. There might only be 2, but I think there are 3. I'm still on the Libby waiting list for the second one. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we get that soon. The fourth one is the only physical one I have to show you, and that is Mary Oliver's poetry collection, 1,000 Mornings. I read this to kick off National Poetry Month. If you did not know, I am the poet laureate of a town in Massachusetts, and I was really thinking and feeling like spring is coming and wanting to reconnect with poetry. I love Mary Oliver's poems. And this was a quick collection that I knew that I had, and I wanted to be able to share pieces as spring was coming out. Mary Oliver is also local to Massachusetts, so she lived in Provincetown, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. So I also feel like these are settings and scenes that I'm very familiar with, and I just thought this was like totally beautiful. I went through and I annotated this poem, like different poems. You can see kind of flagging and highlighting things that stood out to me. Just absolutely lovely, lovely, lovely. The last three of 2026. This one I read on my Kindle fairly recently. Go as a River by Shelley Reed. My sister had read this book and I knew she really enjoyed it, but it happened to be a skip the line loan on Libby for my Kindle, and I decided to just pick it up. And I have a way to describe this book that's going to make it sound not as good as it is. It felt like, if you ever remember back in elementary school, when you just were reading books, you always had to have a book with you and you just got to pick whatever you wanted. And I felt like teachers always had a small selection of historical fiction books that were like human stories, but you still learned about a time period. They didn't feel like you were reading a history book. They didn't feel like you were learning about history, but you were through the people's story. And I feel like that's what this was. This story follows Tori, who's in Colorado, I believe, in the early 1900s, mid 1900s, when a lot of expansion is happening out in the West. She essentially lives on a farm, and it tells the story of her life and the social tensions that she had to deal with, the tensions being a woman she had to deal with, and just the challenges throughout. The core cruxes of this book being she falls in love with a Native American, and Native American white folk tensions are high in this area at this time, and he ends up getting murdered, spoiler alert, and how she navigates being a single teen mom out of wedlock, and the choices she has to make to have her baby but still navigate the society of the time. And she grew up on a peach farm in Colorado, which is like not where you would think about for peaches, but she grew up there, and kind of how she rebuilt a life for herself in the grief of the challenges of her life. It was so beautifully written. The writing was so poetic and lyrical and beautiful, but so interesting. I just was sucked in to this story in Tori's life and wanting to know what happened to her. We would learn about an incident from her teens, and I would still be wondering, like, is that person gonna come back? Like, is she ever gonna see them again? And it just really kept me reading and kind of growing up alongside her, which was beautiful. The last two, we're almost there. This one I did also listen to on audio, and I absolutely loved it for a couple of reasons that I'm going to share. First, I heard about this book. I saw it on a reel of somebody left a note in a copy of this book at a bookstore because it was their favorite book. They were like leaving a message for the next reader or whoever bought the book of how beautiful the story was. And I thought that was really cool, but it was also surprised me. And this is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I will be the first to admit I have a misconception of Miss Ann Patchett, and honestly, Miss Patchett, you deserve better than this. I totally thought Ann Patchett was more like grandma literature, along the lines of Ellen Hildebrand. I've met Ellen Hildebrand. I've worked Ellen Hildebrand events. I think my assumption is just in that regard. But I read the premise of this book. It sounded interesting. Honestly, it was such a gripping audiobook. It was also read by Meryl Streep, and I think that really helped the reading of this book. because Meryl Streep doesn't just read a book, she performs the book and she gets into character. She had different voices. Her intonation of different lines was absolutely perfect for this. But what is interesting, and I feel like I kind of stay away from books like this, having lived through this time, this book takes place in COVID on a family farm in Michigan, a family cherry farm in Michigan. This woman is in her 50s, 60s, and all of her kids have had to come home for COVID, and they are navigating that first season in the pandemic, and she is spending this season picking cherries with them, telling them a story from her 20s and actually from her childhood, where she was an actress and she was performing with somebody who went on to be a Hollywood movie star, and her time working with him and being in love with him before he was rich and famous. And it really humanizes her as a mom, and like in the sense of how well she knows her kids, how she went through motherhood in her responses to them, but also how sometimes, and I'm guilty of it myself, we forget that our moms were whole people before we came along and they became mom and they became wife and whatever. So it was really interesting from like a mother-daughter perspective to listen to this book. But honestly, the frame tale, the story within a story, I was so sucked in. I love a frame tale, honestly. It was very much the same kind of concept of Go as a River. I just kept wanting to know the next portion of the story, like what is going to happen with Duke. I don't know, I think I'm just in an era personally where I really want like a simple, quiet life. I want a little farmhouse. I want my own little farm, my patch of land with the person I love, with my animals, with my kids. Not that I have any of those things other than my dog and my boyfriend, but it just felt like it really resonated and aligned with where I am in my personal life right now. This one, am I embarrassed? Maybe I'm a little embarrassed. It feels like a cliche, but the first and #1 book so far this year that I have read is also on Kindle, and that is, everybody's talking about it, so I feel like this will not be that surprising, but Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman is my #1 read so far this year. This is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, though I do think a lot more people are enjoying it than would originally think they would. But this is a dystopian sci-fi fantasy where basically the world blows up and anybody that was in a building at the time of this explosion blips out, and everybody that is left is essentially sucked into an alien-controlled video game. The aliens have invaded Earth, have taken over, and those that have left to survive need to survive through different levels of a video game in order to like get back to normal, if there is a normal. But their way to survive is competing through a video game. And it is a lit RPG. It is, which I'm gonna be so honest with you, I didn't even know lit RPG was a thing. Now that I know that lit RPG is a thing, I need to read more lit RPG, because it was actually so scratching the itch of all the things I talked about before with Paladin's Grace. It felt like I was playing D&D. It felt like I was hobby stacking. Atomic Habits talks about habit stacking. I was hobby stacking. Not only was I cozy reading, I was playing a video game. I was not just reading, but I was making D&D-like decisions. It felt like all of the things I love about so many of my hobbies in a series. And honestly, it's a silly premise. There is some like campy, funny, goofy humor in this book, but there's also some really real emotions. And if you haven't heard of this, Carl is also like, his party co-character is a cat. His ex-girlfriend's cat named Princess Donut, who can talk. And so there's silly things like that, but he is really thinking seriously and emotionally about him and Donut's survival and what is the right choice. And it's not ever things that I would think would be funny, but there's commentary in there. There's seriousness, there's emotion, and it is just so well written and well paced. It felt familiar. I loved visualizing, clicking through. Oh, sir. It felt like I was playing in one of my favorite video games. It sucked me in, and this is why it really ranks #1. When I'm in a reading slump, if you can keep my attention, I read that book in, I want to say, 3 days. It was a book that I literally, and this is how you know, it made me take my full lunch break. I brought my Kindle to work to read my book for my full hour of my lunch break. Also how I got through it in 3 days. I would just get so sucked into this book, and there are luckily still plenty that are out. It was on Kindle Unlimited. I have the second one on my Kindle, so hopefully through Kindle Unlimited it's still available and I can keep reading. But I know that this series has taken the internet by storm, really, and BookTok and BookTube and Bookstagram by storm, but I really enjoyed it. I would say it's also kind of similar to Paladin's Grace in that it's middle stakes, middle intensity, middle fantasy sci-fi. It's not going to overwhelm you, it's not going to intimidate you, but it's also not going to just be like fluffy and mindless at the same time, which is what kind of the balance that I need for where I am in my reading right now. I did want to name a couple other books that I'm not going to talk about too much, but I did start reading them. I have plans to finish them. I haven't done it yet, and I'm working on it really hard. The first I tried really hard to read, and I actually made a lot of progress in. I'm proud of that. When there was the whole Wuthering Heights craze, I did reread Wuthering Heights. I tried to, at least. I got like 40% of the way through, and then I saw the movie, and then I was like, I'll get to it. So I do plan to finish Wuthering Heights. When, I don't know, don't ask me. The other book that I tried to read that I do fully plan to go back to is Brigands and Bread Knives by Travis Baldree, which is the third book in the Legends and Lattes series. It just didn't click with me right away. I think it's because it doesn't really follow Viv, which was the main character in the other two books. It was a hard adjustment, but I am planning to read that and get back to that at some point. When though, I don't know. But that's everything that I've read. My top book being Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinneman. My least favorite or my lowest ranked read being Heartstrings by Kes Wilder. I don't remember. Again, let me know in the comments down below what you are reading, what has been your best read so far this year, what's been your most disappointing read so far this year. And again, if you have any recs to get me out of a reading slump, leave them in the comments down below for me. And alongside that, leave me a little flower emoji of your choice, because spring and summer have finally sprung. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. And you can find the next one Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Have a good day wherever you are, and happy reading. Bye-bye.